Hey, today I want to talk about 5 of my favorite bass players. And by that I mean not necessarily the ones that I think are the most amazing or technically proficient, but the ones that have had the biggest influence on me as a bass player and have had the biggest part of my musical journey. So I'm genuinely curious, who are your 5? Who are the bass players that have had the biggest impact on you as a musician? I would love to know. Please let me know in the comments. Before I start the list, I do have to say I do have a bass course. It's about 2.5 hours long. By the end of this course, you should be able to play in a band, write your own bass lines, be creative as a bass player, and just maybe take the next step in your musical journey. So the link to that is in the description. So now that that's out of the way, here are 5 bass players that have had the biggest musical influence on me. So this is in no particular order, but I do have to put James Jamerson first. If you don't know who James Jamerson is, he is the uncredited bass player behind most of Motown, and I think he's written and played some of the best bass lines ever, at least in popular music. I have so much respect for James Jamerson. If you haven't really heard much of his playing, or at least known that it was him playing it, I would encourage you to go listen to Marvin Gaye's record What's Going On front to back and just enjoy hearing the brilliant architecture behind the scenes that James is laying down. He's just amazing. He's just had a huge influence on me, and learning his bass lines has helped me grow a lot as a musician. So if you want to check out his bass lines, there's a really great resource called Standing in the Shadows of Motown with a lot of his bass lines transcribed, and I've gotten a lot out of that book. I found this really cool quote from Berry Gordy, who was like the head of Motown back in the day, and he said, "I, like some other producers, would not do a session unless at least 2 of the Funk Brothers were present, namely drummer Benny Benjamin and James Jamerson on bass." So if the founder of Motown didn't want to do a recording session without James Jamerson there, that's saying something. One thing that's kind of sad is that in life, James Jamerson didn't really get the credit that he deserved, and he's no longer with us. So I want to do my part to give credit where credit is due. James Jamerson, thank you for all you've done for music, all you've done for bass, and thank you for everything you've taught me. So number 1 on the list, James Jamerson. Okay, so the next bass player on the list for me is Donald Duck Dunn. If you don't know who Donald Duck Dunn is, he's the bass player that played bass in Booker T and the MGs and was sort of the house bass player for Stax Records in Memphis. So he's a huge part of that classic soul Memphis sound, and I love that sound. I love Donald Duck Dunn's playing. It's like this perfect swagger, perfect note choice, solid foundation, just great vibe to build all of this soulful music off of. And I feel like the further I get along with my music and my musical growth, the more I just want to sound like Donald Duck Dunn. He just has this undeniably cool, confident, and reliable sound. He's also a fellow pipe smoker. I smoke a tobacco pipe. I was looking up some of the people that he's played with outside of Booker T and the MGs. So I found this list. Some of these people he recorded with, and some of them he was on stage with. But like, check this out. You got Otis Redding, Sam and Dave. You've got Albert King, Bill Withers, Elvis Presley, Muddy Waters, Freddie King. He played with Eric Clapton. He played with Stevie Wonder on stage. He played with Neil Young. He played with Eddie Vedder. He played with Tom Petty on stage. He was actually, I found out he was offered a spot in CCR as like the bass player for CCR. I don't know why it didn't work out, but he was offered that spot. And I love CCR. I had no idea. So he just played for some of these amazing people, and he just has undeniably cool factor. If you haven't really heard Donald Duck Dunn or known who he was, I would say check out the Blues Brothers movie. That was actually the first time I heard him as a kid and recognized who he was. And I know that movie's a little silly and dated, but it's still one of my top 10 movies of all time. And it's an awesome movie for the fact that you get to see all of these legendary soul musicians playing, and see them in like good video and audio sync where you can see all these classic soul musicians performing. And a cool thing about that movie is the band in the movie that has this series of misadventures with the Blues Brothers actually, in real life, those musicians are some of the greatest musicians ever that played on all of these amazing records. So the bass player in the Blues Brothers is Donald Duck Dunn. I would say pour yourself a good drink, sit down and watch the Blues Brothers at a high volume with a subwoofer, and you will know who Donald Duck Dunn is. He is an amazing bass player. And another cool resource to check out, there's an album called McClaymore Avenue, which is Booker T and the MG's response to Abbey Road by the Beatles. They covered it as a Memphis soul band. So a super cool reinterpretation of an amazing album. That'd be a cool way to hear him playing as well, which leads me to the next person on the list for me who doesn't really need any introduction, Paul McCartney. Okay, so you don't need me to tell you about Paul McCartney, so I'll be brief about him, but I will say why I love his bass playing so much. Two main reasons. One is his approach to tone. I love that warm, thumpy sound that he has, but the other thing I love about his bass and his bass playing is his approach to counter melody. Because he writes these amazing melodies, obviously, with the Beatles, but he writes these really interesting counter melodies to those melodies in the bass lines, which not just support those melodies, but make them more interesting and just they're just brilliant. I think a really cool example is Something. Check out the bass line on that. Just sit down and learn it by ear if you haven't, and I feel like you'll learn a lot from that because I know I have. So obviously, he's one of the most influential musicians of all time, not just bass players, but for me, I love his bass playing, and he's had a huge influence on me as a bass player. So thank you, Paul. Okay, so next up for me is going to be Pino Palladino. Wow, Pino Palladino is one of my favorite bass players. I learned so much from him. I think what I like so much about him is his versatility. Like, I first learned about him on some of his work with John Mayer in like the early to mid 2000s. I remember getting a CD for my birthday, for my 16th birthday. I remember like noticing these bass parts as a 16-year-old and being like, this is really cool. And then later I learned he's playing for an artist named D'Angelo, this amazing R&B soulful bass playing with this super trippy approach to timing, and then he turns around and he's playing with The Who. Like, he's playing with all of these amazing artists in these different genres, and he's doing all of them with integrity and coolness. Like, he just has this undeniable cool factor. And I think another thing I love about him is he'll play these something deceptively simple, and then he'll just sneak in this crazy little lick that's like the perfect thing. It's like I think I love his restraint. Like, he is so good at knowing the moment to choose the perfect, interesting thing that doesn't distract from the song but makes the song cooler. And that's some voodoo. No pun intended. That's some magic to be able to do that. So I actually have a cat named Pino, named after Pino. I know it's kind of weird. I hope he doesn't see this because that's weird. That's how much I love Pino Palladino as a musician, that we named our cat after him. Amazing, amazing bass player. One of the bass players that has been the biggest inspiration to me and that I admire the most, Pino Palladino. Okay, number 5 for me. It has to be Victor Wooten. I know that might be a surprise because I'm not much of a virtuoso bass player, but believe it or not, I did. I remember I played his version of Amazing Grace in my high school talent show, and or at least I tried to, and I didn't play like him, but I spent a lot of time learning his solos, or at least trying to, and learning some of his techniques, and I learned a lot about music by trying to do what he does. I don't think anyone can really do what he does, but I learned so much from trying to learn it. And through that, I remember I went to see him multiple times, and every time I saw him at a show, and a few times I waited around afterwards to talk with him. And, I'm just a 16-year-old kid. There's a line of people waiting to talk to him. And I remember he always took the time to talk with me and with everyone else. And in that moment, I was the most important person in the world to him. He gave me his full attention. There's a line of people waiting to talk to him. I remember he talked to me about bass tone for a few minutes and really gave me his focus and shared with me. And I've seen him at a number of clinics, and I've seen a lot of him doing interviews online. And I just admire the kind of educator he is and how he treats people. I want to be more like Victor Wooten. He's just a really classy, thoughtful person. Obviously, an undeniable virtuoso at his instrument. But a lot of people don't realize he's also an amazing bass player. And I don't mean as a soloist, but like as a supporting bass player. He's brilliant at it. And a lot of people don't notice that because they're so impressed with his solos. But the way he supports the flectones. Like, I think if you haven't heard much of Victor Wooten as a bass player, listen to the album Live at the Quick, which is the album where is a live album where he performs Amazing Grace, obviously, and everybody knows that. But listen to him play bass behind Bela Fleck and Jeff Coffin and some of these other musicians as a supporting role in the ensemble, and it's like a masterclass on playing bass. So I love Victor Wooten not just because he's an undeniable virtuoso at the bass, but he's also a brilliant supporting bass player. He is a kind and thoughtful human, and he's a brilliant educator. So I want to be more like Victor Wooten. I think we need more people like Victor Wooten in the world. And I'm just so thankful for all I've learned from him. So thank you, Victor Wooten, for being the person that you are. And for what you've done for the bass community and for music community. I feel like a lot of people could say the same things. He's had a huge influence on me, and I want to be more like him. Those are my 5 most influential bass players for me and my musical journey and my growth. Who are your 5? Why are they your 5? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments, please. And also, like I said earlier, the number one way you can help this channel out is by checking out the bass course. The link is in the description. It's about a 2.5-hour course that'll help you to get on your feet as a bass player, to help you play in a band, to help you start to improvise and write your own bass lines, and just take the next step in your bass playing. I think beginners, intermediate bass players, and even advanced players could benefit from the course. And the link is in the description. Check it out. The other thing that you can do to help me out is to actually subscribe. And I know that's something all YouTubers say, but it really does help us out if you actually hit the button. So please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video. I try to do a video once a week. So thanks for hanging out this week, and I'll see you on the next video.